And welcome to the sixth webinar of the USAID Feed the Future Food Safety Innovation Lab. The pandemic has taught us many things, including how important it is to be able to communicate science-based, data-driven information in real time to food producers around the world to ensure that safe, nutritious food can be produced to feed our populations. Unfortunately, food security disruptions come in many forms. Recent estimates suggest that up to 40 million additional people could be pushed into poverty and food insecurity in 2022 alone due to the secondary impacts of Russia's war in Ukraine. We're excited today, though, that you have joined us to hear from our international team of food safety experts who will reflect on this USAID-funded project that concluded last year. The project built the capacity of food industry professionals around the globe to help them navigate the early realities of the COVID-19 challenges to their workforce and food production systems. The lessons learned and built partnerships detailed here today are an example of a nimble strategy to reduce the impacts of global events on food safety and food security in the name of building resilience. If I can draw your attention to the technical support slide below, you'll note that there's a Q&A function located at the bottom of the screen. We ask that anyone in the audience feel free to include their questions using the Q&A function. There's also closed captioning available to the right of that button as well. So today we welcome a really elite panel of people from around the globe who represent the best of food safety and food security. We welcome representation from USAID, from the U.S. academic institutions, and partners from around the globe to share their perspectives on this food safety task force, how it worked, and its potential for future food insecurity challenges. It's my absolute pleasure today to welcome Carol Wilson. Carol is the director of the U.S. Agency for International Development Center for Nutrition. She has over 30 years of international development experience and has worked on several technical areas in her tenure with USAID, including agriculture, private sector engagement, democracy, and government. Carol is a Foreign Service Officer and has served in Afghanistan, Iraq, Angola, Ethiopia, and Georgia. Welcome, Carol.
Thank you, Haley. Trying to get my video turned on, and when we were testing, there it was, it worked. Okay, great. So thank you everyone for inviting me to speak at the webinar today. I'm very happy to be here. And thank you, Haley, for the introduction. Over the past 3 years, we have witnessed unprecedented shocks to the food system. In response, USAID and our partners, including the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Food Safety, have pivoted our programming to ensure the world's most vulnerable populations have access to safe, nutritious foods despite these ongoing crises. Many countries right now are reeling from high levels of food insecurity, hunger, and malnutrition as a result of the combined crises: the COVID-19 pandemic, the severe drought in the Horn of Africa, protracted conflict, and already elevated global food prices. Russia's invasion of Ukraine stands to only worsen people's vulnerability to hunger, poverty, and malnutrition, putting millions at risk. We anticipate negative impacts to crop production, household incomes, and nutrition, particularly in countries that rely on imports from Ukraine and Russia. These impacts, if left unaddressed, could push 40 million more people into poverty and food insecurity this year, according to the Center for Global Development, and affect planting seasons well into 2023. While there are multiple determinants of malnutrition, the global food crisis leads to potential risk for malnutrition along 3 pathways within food systems. The 3 pathways are reduced diet quality, increased costs, and need for specialized nutritious foods, and decreased financial support for nutrition programming. While all 3 pathways significantly impact malnutrition, the Food Safety Innovation Lab and other Feed the Future partners are well equipped to address the first pathway, reduced diet quality. Survey data collected during previous economic crises, such as in Indonesia and Bangladesh, indicate that when food prices rise, people maintain their consumption of calories by buying more highly processed foods or cheap staples such as rice and maize. They also reduce their consumption of more expensive nutritious foods, such as fruits and vegetables, meat and dairy, thus reducing diet quality. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Innovation Lab for Food Safety demonstrated its commitment to improving diet quality by establishing the International COVID-19 Rapid Response Project. This was designed to mitigate food safety and food security challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic in several low and middle income countries, including Bangladesh, Cambodia, Kenya, Nepal, and Senegal. The goal was to provide the food industry in these countries with the tools and resources to implement technical, organizational, and personal measures to reduce person-to-person coronavirus transmission across the food system. The focus of the webinar today will be how this project's scalable approach and network of experts can be mobilized to address future pandemics or natural disasters, which threaten the food systems in these and other countries. It is important to build upon lessons learned from our previous investments to address current and future shocks, including the climate crisis and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In light of COVID-19 and increased adoption of systems approaches, it is now impossible to ignore the relevance of food safety in achieving development outcomes across multiple sectors, including health, resilience, and of course, food security and nutrition. In order to address the complex interactions between sectors, actors, and outcomes, USAID recognized the need for a holistic, multi-sectoral food systems approach to address food insecurity and nutrition. The agency understands that if we want to achieve sustained progress in food security, we need to utilize a systems approach, which includes robust investments in food safety throughout food systems. Improved food safety practices not only contribute to food security, but can address other sustainable development goals, including SDG 12, responsible consumption and production. Efficient food safety systems can reduce food loss and waste and help us meet SDG targets 12.3, reducing food loss and waste by 50% before 2030. Moving forward, we must remember that food safety is a priority across the whole food system, from beginning to end. To address food safety issues holistically, the development community must employ an integrated food systems approach in collaboration with academic institutions and the private sector to support the most vulnerable populations, including women and children under 5. While promoting World Food Safety Day, the FAO said, "If it isn't safe, it isn't food." I will end today by reminding us that we cannot achieve our overarching goal of food security and improved nutrition without safe food. So thank you again for inviting me to make the opening remarks, and I will pass it on. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, for emphasizing that really the fragility of global food security and the role that food safety plays, not only in solving food security challenges, but also its role in sustainable development goals. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Martin Wiedemann. Dr. Wiedemann is the Gellert Family Professor of Food Safety at Cornell University in the United States. His research focuses on farm-to-table microbial food quality and safety and the application of molecular tools and quantitative modeling approaches to study the transmission of foodborne pathogens and spoilage organisms. He and his team have published extensively and are regularly asked to help industry across the world with a range of microbial food safety and quality challenges. He is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the Institute of Food Technologists, the American Academy of Microbiology, and the International Academy of Food Science and Technology. Welcome, Martin.
Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to give a short overview of a multi-pronged approach we used and developed to provide support for the food industry during crisis, and we piloted and developed this during COVID. In the next slide, you'll see my 2 parts of the presentation I'm going to give now, how the approach was developed in the US, and then how it was implemented internationally. And later on, I'm going to come back to sort of wrap this up with some lessons learned and how this approach can be used in the future during other crises. So the key components of this multi-pronged approach were to identify industry concerns and challenges. And that was not a one-time process, but a continuous process through the office hours to then find solutions and address these concerns and then communicate them back to the food industry. And we were doing this in an iterative fashion as shown in the next slide. And there are really four key components to it. And the cornerstone of this that we'll talk a little bit about are the virtual office hours, where we understand what industry needs, but also communicate back to them. What we learned there, we use to develop a website that carries frequently asked questions, training videos, and other information. And then the virtual office hours are again used to communicate the availability of these tools to industry, even get their feedback, and potentially improve these tools. And we can continue this as long as we need during a crisis, as the needs of the industry change throughout the crises. So what are these virtual office hours? So, and this was a challenge early on for some people because it's not a presentation. It literally is an hour where subject matter experts are present on the internet, on Zoom, to answer questions from industry. Sometimes you might have a 5-10 minute introduction. Often we would later on introduce to review what is on the web page, but we often would have no idea what to expect in terms of questions. People were allowed and often had pre-submitted questions, but we feel that any questions that people had. We did a total of 59 sessions, more than 3,700 attendees, and answered almost 700 questions during these US-based office hours that we put on during COVID-19. And so, as we said, the virtual office hours are the cornerstone of that. They allow us to identify the needs, to use that identification of needs to develop resources, various resources, and then to promote these solutions during the office hours. So for example, early on, we developed a decision tree based on what we heard from the industry that helped industry coordinate and take a response when a case of COVID-19 was identified. Let's say one of the employees tested positive, and then a lot of questions would come up, or one of the employees showed symptoms. What should they do? What should they do about quarantining people, cleaning sanitation, etc.? People really struggled with that. So we built a decision tree for them based on what we heard in the office hours they needed, but also what we got as best practices from industry in office hours, but also from CDC and other authorities in the US. So as we said, we, for more than a year and still ongoing really, had this approach in the US, but we then implemented and used this internationally to support the food industry internationally in collaboration with the USAID Food Safety Innovation Lab. And that's what I'm going to talk about now. So we used the same structure. The basic structure stayed the same, but obviously the content and how we delivered it slightly changed and was adapted to the international needs. We still maintained the cornerstone of the virtual office hours. Now, it's important to realize that internationally and as we move to other countries and places, these can be challenging because very often, particularly if you work with academics and people in authority, there's a certain level of lack of comfortness with having open-ended questions and not necessarily knowing what one gets versus doing a pre-prepared remarks or presentation. And one of our key parts of as we implement this internationally was really to help people get comfortable with the uncertainty of the virtual office hours and really see the value of those to much more quickly identify needs and respond to them than particularly classically academics would do. So for example, we then use these to develop different resources or take resources we had in the US and adopt them to international needs. One need that was early on identified was, how do you prioritize different things? There was a lot of concern internationally about surfaces, contamination of COVID-19 on surfaces, which often would lead to neglecting, the actual control strategies that were important, which is preventing person-to-person spread, use of masks, quarantining, surveillance, etc. People just focused on surfaces, which really were very clear very early on were not a major transmitter of COVID-19. So we developed tools to help people prioritize their resources to really focus on what had the largest impact. So one of the key things was to build a task force to manage these challenges and use this task force to run these office hours. So we identified local subject matter experts, the Food Safety Innovation Lab, and their existing connections internationally were critical for that. Once we had these experts, we provided mentorship and training, supported the development of the in-country resources, such as the one I've just shown, in the appropriate languages, and then collaborated on the delivery of these in-country virtual office hours. Sometimes we participated in it, sometimes we just made sure the logistics worked. We really left it up to the local subject matter experts, what they wanted and needed from us and how we could best support them. Here are the key collaborators, and you will hear from two of them later today to really get sort of a firsthand experience how this works. So you hear from Jaya and George. And as you can see, we rolled this out initially in Bangladesh, Cambodia, Nepal, Kenya, and Senegal. But we also held 2 office hours that were regional, one for Southeast Asia and one for Africa, where we brought not just the collaborating countries listed here together, but also opened it up very widely to countries in these regions. So what did we do to facilitate these office hours? We had individual introductory meetings and planning meetings. We did, which I thought was key, virtual roundtable discussions where they were the experts, we asked questions, and we helped them sort of get an idea and get comfortable with how to do these. We invited the experts to the US-based office hours so you could see this in the real world and really got them ready to do this by themselves, maybe with some support from us. Key was to review the COVID basics early on because there was a lot of questions about just what do we do, what's the right thing to do, what are the US, what is the international experience? And then these mock sessions were really, really key. Here's an example of some of the resources we developed. And so it was about 25 in-country resources, video frequently asked questions. Particular concern about the COVID-19 was not foodborne. There was a lot of panic that led to a lot of issues. People thought it was foodborne. Strategy checklist, how to prioritize control strategy, how to handle fresh produce. And you can see not all were necessary in all different languages, but we really helped these countries to develop what they needed. So in summary, what did we do? So we created this expert community. We developed the in-country resources. We hosted and delivered 19 sessions of these virtual office hours, more than 1,000 participants, almost 250 questions addressed. So that's what I had here. You now will hear from our 2 collaborators, and I'll be back later to really talk about the bigger picture lessons learned. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martin. A really, really nice example of navigating misinformation, which was rampant when it came to COVID-19 in the early stages of the pandemic, and also a really fun example of building local capacity with local in-country leadership. Much appreciated. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. George Obong. He's a senior lecturer and chair of the Department of Food Science, Nutrition, and Technology at the University of Nairobi in Kenya. Dr. Obong conducts research on and has published broadly on safe food processing and issues related to human nutrition. A food safety leader with expertise in quality assurance and risk analysis, he has contributed to the development of food standards for a range of products, including fats and oils, coffee, roots and tubers, meat and poultry, and processed cereals and pulses. He chairs the Food Science and Technology Platform of Kenya and has worked with the Global Food Safety Partnership, the National Codex, and the FAO-WHO Coordinating Committee for Africa. Welcome.
Right, this is George Obong from the University of Nairobi, Department of Food Science, Nutrition, and Technology. And I am making a short presentation on impact and lessons learned in Kenya, COVID-19 office hours that were held during the pandemic season. In the virtual office hours that we held, we had 3 sessions which were basically based in Kenya. But in the sessions, we had panelists from Kenya, South Africa, Denmark, and US. And in these 3 sessions, we had 158 participants taking part, out of whom 46% were female, which is a good mix of the attendees. And 38 questions were addressed during the office hours. In the second session, we had 2 sessions, which actually cut across Africa. So we dubbed it Pan-Africa Virtual Office Hours. And in these office hours, we had 193 participants taking place, attending the sessions, and 27 questions were addressed in these sessions. And that simply shows how widespread we tried to cover the office hours in terms of attendees and panelists. Now, in the office hours, there are resources that were developed in conjunction with project partners, and these were for Kenya, and they included a number of them. And the first one was how to handle fresh produce. The other one was how to prioritize COVID-19 control strategies. And the third one was food facility COVID-19 strategy checklist. And the fourth one was food industry frequently asked questions from 3 sessions of the virtual office hours. And the last one was video frequently asked questions. COVID-19 is not foodborne. And both of these were, of course, they were developed in English, but they were translated in Swahili, which is a local language vastly used in Kenya and East Africa. So if you look at your right side, you can see an example of a Swahili resource that was developed. If you look at the impact of hosting virtual office hours in Kenya, which were, of course, the first 3 sessions, this can only be explained well by testimonials from people from industry and those who attended. And if you look at these examples, it will indicate for you that it provided a good platform for cutting edge information. For example, Mondi says, "Thanks, Martin, for a very informative presentation." Of course, Martin was one of our key presenters, and during the office hours gave an overarching presentation and made very wonderful contribution and discussion. And then James, for example, Dukui says, "Great piece of information," because there is a lot of fear that had been instilled in people. Let's not forget at this point, we were under the pandemic and people were not sure of what the pandemic holds. And there were a lot of fears, there were a lot of misconceptions. And this office hours, from this comment, just tells you that it actually helped to demystify a number of fears that were being spread among the people. And then Joyce Kiture says, "How can this vital information get to the common market trader like Kawangware? I am one of them." So Joyce was one of the market traders, the small scale traders who happened to join this meetings, and was very impressed by the information. I was just wondering how it can reach the traders. And of course, that gave us another work to do to ensure that we spread our tentacles with what we already had from these office hours. So if you look at the impact again of the office hours, the virtual office hours that we held, and the number 2, they also served as a very useful resource for the industry. And I have just given two testimonials from Maurice Mwendwa, who is working from Kenya Wine Agencies Limited. And he says that I have applied key principles of coronavirus control at work in Kwale and found them very useful. When I followed up with the Maurice this week, he actually indicated that he applied especially the ones on food hygiene when they were trying to set up food safety management systems. And that simply shows how this was effective, because Maurice attended about 90% of our office hours. Then Nyaboke, who was working in a lab at that point, indicated that because they normally worked in a very small space in the labs, food labs, which of course provided a very intricate balance in order to apply knowledge gained from the session. It was very critical to use the information because in the workspace is small, but of course you understand that COVID-19 required that you have a space or you have a distance, 1.5 meters to be precise, that was given by the ministry. So Nyaboke found this very useful, and that simply tells you how useful the office hours were in the Kenyan scenario. Now, if we go to the impact of hosting now the Pan-African, because the first two sections have looked at the Kenyan scenario, but the Pan-African, of course, we discussed similar issues, but this cut across the African region. The first thing that we note is the capacity building, because many of the attendees, by the way, were staff and students, and of course, industry players who gained a lot of information about the pandemic. And as I've indicated earlier, that time there was quite a scanty information, and there were things which were very dynamic, changing every day, and information was coming and needed to be sieved through a professional lens, which these office hours actually gave. And then, of course, the knowledge gained, as we have indicated, percolated a lot in our institutions, because new and valuable information on hygiene and management of COVID-19, which are very crucial, even for myself, for classes that I take, as well as other of my colleagues, and in the industry, was very useful within the sessions that we gained from the sessions. Then the networking, not to mention, I personally had to network with a number of people, including the ones that I had never met. And this meeting just brought people together. We reached more colleagues, we reached the industry, and the connection remains up to date because we still have a lot of questions and discussions related to office hours and COVID-19. And this gave us an upper edge or an upper hand when it comes to answering questions related to this. Again, if you look at the impact in the Pan-African virtual office hours, you realize that the virtual webinar management, at that time, we were just transiting from the usual physical meetings. And personally, and even my colleagues, of course, we gained a lot of information, a wealth of experience when it comes to managing online webinars. And as a moderator of these sessions, I think up to today, I am applying this very well. And then the new research areas were, during the discussions, you would find that new research areas kept on coming. And one of the areas that kept on coming is how to apply the same or similar things in the local context in the Kenyan scenario, and especially taking into account our informal markets, which are usually very crowded. People have to buy from them, and that actually gave rise to some of the proposals that we developed later. Of course, we are still waiting if we can get funding on the same. And then we developed material resources, which of course have been used by the industry, and some people are still asking for the links. We continue to share what we had, and in our own case at the university, at the pilot plant, we actually made use of those materials that were developed during this time. So if you look at the successes, I would say that we were able to bring industry and academia so close together. Many times in the developing countries, you will find academia and industry sitting far apart. But in this scenario, we had quite a lot of them coming together, which actually created a good rapport for us. And that is a very lasting impact that we continue to reap from. From those industries, some of them we have gone ahead to have got collaborative agreements, and that is a good thing. And then, of course, adapting virtual meetings. From here onwards, I think we have never gone back to physical meetings as much as we used, because now the knowledge gained, the experience gained has been able to help us to do more of virtual meetings. And then the resources are now available for us to use, and this can be used over a long duration of time. And of course, during this time, I was, as the department, we were able to rally the whole university, including the college principal and the vice chancellor, who is in the whole university, was able to open the first webinar. And that for us was a very key achievement, because the university is having about 10 campuses. We are just a department in one of those campuses. And so we were able to bring people together in order to know what is happening and how things were evolving with COVID-19 and matters of food safety. And going by that, there are no successes where you may find total lack of hurdles. But some of the hurdles that we can mention included tracking the use of developed material. That has been a very difficult part. We are trying to have only those whom we keep contact with. We keep on contacting them, but again, that is very limited. And of course, the hurdles that time of managing, the difficulties of managing, having people online, and the difficulties of course, convincing people to join in time. And of course, during that time, I remember one of the sessions was being hacked, the Zoom session was being hacked. That was a very embarrassing moment, and for us, it remains an hurdle. And of course, the last but not the least is the evolving and dynamic research findings from COVID-19. We all know that COVID-19 has mutated so much. And in the recent past, we have even seen in food sector, matters of COVID-19 from China, reports coming that the packaged frozen products, the packaging was kind of seen as a vehicle. That just tells you how the dynamic level of this virus, and it keeps on evolving. And of course, that keeps on telling us to probably up our game and just look at when it changes, how more then should we look at the changes through research. So it is a hurdle which actually becomes another opportunity for more research. I want to say thank you very much, and I want to appreciate Feed the Future, the US government's Global Hunger and Food Security Initiative. I also want to appreciate Purdue University, Cornell University, University of Nairobi, and of course, the Food Science and Technology Platform of Kenya for making the COVID-19 office hours a success. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, George, especially for underscoring the need to communicate science-based guidance to the continuum of actors in food production systems, that people really at the front line in traditional markets also need information to support their workforce and to safely produce food. I also appreciate your comments on building those partnerships between academia and the private sector. I know it's certainly something that's championed at Purdue University, Cornell University, and really across the globe, but it's really helping us find the needs of industry. We're building students that become their employees. Those relationships are absolutely critical. I'd like to remind everyone, if you have questions, to please add them to the Q&A. The button is located in the middle lower part of the screen. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jaya Grun, who is a senior environmental specialist with expertise in rational development and conservation in developing projects. He currently serves as a program coordinator in the Health and Environmental Program at the Nepal Development Research Institute. Over the past 25 years, he has worked in implementation, monitoring and evaluation, advising, information communication technology, and multi-stakeholder projects for local governments, as well as international development agencies. His expertise includes integration of cross-sectoral development and policy implication, environmental compliance, and ecological auditing for sustainable development. In addition to coordinating national and international projects, he has expertise in the development of project implementation frameworks and results-based monitoring and evaluation strategies. Welcome, Jaya.
Hello, namaste. Very good morning. My name is Jaya Kumar Gurung from Nepal, the program coordinator at Nepal Development Research Institute, NDRI. NDRI is a leading think tank in Nepal. I was leading the food industry virtual office hours coordinated by NDRI and the Institute of Food Safety at Cornell University in support of USAID and Purdue University, USAID FTF. It's my great pleasure to share the impact and lesson learned in Nepal from virtual office hour today in this meeting. Here is a summary of virtual office hour that we delivered in Nepal. We hosted 3 sessions of food industry virtual office hours that reached 106 stakeholders, 45% of which were female, and addressed approximately 80 questions. We also hosted 1 regional session with the panelists from 10 Asian countries, who also provided updates about the COVID-19 situation in their respective countries and strategy they were using to control it. At least 122 stakeholder participants attended this event. 48% of them were female. The event was also live streamed on Facebook and had more than 150 views. During the frequently asked questions segment of the regional session, we addressed approximately 17 questions. We also had post-survey after each session. A majority of attendees who completed post-survey after attending virtual office hours in Nepal or the regional Pan-Asia virtual office hours indicated they would implement COVID-19 practices as a result of information they received during virtual office hours. A majority of respondents would also recommend virtual office hours to others. This is about resources developed in virtual office hour. In addition to hosting virtual office hours, we customized and translated several resources, such as one-pagers on how to handle fresh produce and how to prioritize COVID-19 control strategies. We also listed out questions asked during each of the 3 food industry virtual office hours in Nepal and documented written responses to those frequently asked questions in Nepali. In addition to the handouts, we recorded video frequently asked questions that explains how COVID-19 is not foodborne. This is about reflection of beneficiaries. Participants who attended virtual office hours or used resources developed during the project found them helpful and impacted their business practices. Here are a few stories that illustrate how we assisted those working in the food industry. One area of focus during the office hours was to discuss how COVID-19 was transmitted predominantly by close person-to-person contact, not through handling food or food packaging materials. We also stress the importance of continuing to the use of good manufacturing practices, such as proper hand washing to maintain employee hygiene and to prevent cross-contaminations. This helped members of food industry like Ms. Mona Lisa Morgan, a retailer at tea business, understand that COVID-19 would not be transmitted by packing goods or through packaging used in her business. In addition to discussing how COVID-19 was transmitted, we discussed and translated resources aimed to provide mitigation strategy that could be used to prevent the transmission of COVID-19, such as by wearing a mask properly. Mr. Ashish Kasta at Bhutan Devi Private Limited, a canteen business, said that the translated resources help him learn about the importance of masking and how to mask properly. In a final example, during the virtual office hour, we also address some of the myths associated with transmitting COVID-19. Early on in the pandemic, people were afraid that COVID had infected their fresh produce. As a result, they were washing or trying to disinfect fresh fruits and vegetables with detergent or other cleaning chemicals. We discussed that there was no evidence that COVID-19 was transmitted through food and that this practice was not necessary. Instead, fruit and vegetables should be rinsed under clean, potable water. Furthermore, we emphasize that you could actually get sick by using detergent on fresh produce. This discussion helped Ms. Manisha Morgan, a food processor in the pickle industry, understand that it was not necessary to use soap or detergent to clean fresh produce. Some of the junior team members from NDRI also work on the project. They directly benefited from virtual office hour to advance their professional career. The role of those researchers was to communicate with the key stakeholder, facilitate them to participate in workshops virtually, compile FAQ, etc. They are now moved to a better positions with the capacity enhanced and still acknowledge the knowledge and experience they gain in virtual office hour. When I asked one of the researchers, Ms. Nirmala, how was the BOS useful to advance your career? She said, the BOS virtual office hour built my self-confidence while communicating with the high-profile research scientists. At present, I was admitted for my PhD with an assistantship at University of Georgia in the Department of Horticulture. My professor at Georgia is impressed by my involvement in BOS. I'm still in contact with the panel experts from BOS and participants from many countries. Those networks are awesome resources for me and for my professional life. Now I would like to talk about what worked well, challenges faced during the project, and how we overcome them. First of all, what worked well? Most of the questions of the traders and consumers regarding the food safety issue were addressed by the panel scientists of both Nepal and Institute of Food Safety at Cornell University. The discussion was very interactive and lively. There were a couple of challenges faced during the project. First challenge was, it was difficult to get connected to the general farmers and local traders due to their inadequate familiarity with the virtual tools such as Zoom IT technology. Second challenge was there was less participation in the post survey. And those challenges were overcome by mobilizing the volunteer interns of NDRI, my institute, to build their capacities on how to use those virtual means of communication and encourage them for active participations. So this is the end of my summary presentations. Thank you so much for your kind attentions, and I would be happy to answer if you have any inquiries. So let me take this opportunity to Feed the Future USAID, Purdue University, and Institute of Food Safety at Cornell Universities. Thank you. Thank you. Dhanyavad.
Thank you so much, Jaya, and for highlighting an outcome that maybe wasn't the primary goal of this type of this project, but elevating careers of people building their capacity in country so that they can see elevation in their own lives. What an exciting thing. It's my pleasure to ask Martin Wiedmann to return so that he might be able to offer some concluding thoughts on lessons learned and how this multi-pronged approach can be used in the future.
So now that you heard from some of our regional partners, I'm back to provide some high levels, lesson learned, and really outline a little bit how this approach could be used in the future as we face additional and different crises in the food system, but even beyond the food system. So lesson number one is really that the multi-pronged approach we used is highly effective and is absolutely essential, with the virtual office hours being this cornerstone that allows us to quickly understand industry needs and adjust as the needs change, sometimes within 2 or 3 weeks. Internationally, this was really important because it allowed us to understand country-specific concerns and challenges. Sometimes you might think, all of a region might have very similar concerns, but what it really showed us is that the concerns are different from country to country in terms of the overall environment. This allows us to develop targeted responses, and this is going to be a similar issue regardless of what crisis we are facing. The other key learning was really that the food industry and the food system overall needs support during all phases of a crisis, and the needs changed tremendously and quickly. So what we learned in the early phase of the pandemic, there was very little information available. There was very little guidance available. And what's really important was leadership in the initial guidance, and maybe more so than we sometimes comfortable saying, this is how you're gonna do it. And we tend to try to get people more to think about the whys to do something, but early on when time is of the essence, and sometimes we have to be a little bit more, this is what you need to do, while still providing guidance on the whys. We saw a major shift during the pandemic that very quickly that lack of information became too much information. And not just too much information, but a lot of misinformation, a lot of confusion, which then meant we had to somewhat shift our strategy and understanding when that change happened. The office hours were key to it, when we then often switched into a lot more dispelling myth, or, new paper came out. China found COVID on a surface. People would go back to panicking about surfaces. We had to very quickly react. These office hours allowed us to do this and allowed us to quickly modify the resources that we had on the web page. Very often we retire frequently asked questions. So that ability to know what's going on the ground through the office hours and then quickly reacting is key to provide industry the specific support they need during different phases of a crisis. Regional office hours were key. So we obviously, as I mentioned before, we had the office hours for each country, where we made sure it was an appropriate language, et cetera. But then we also did regional office hours. While, as I mentioned before, each country is different, there are some similarities, and for people to see that others struggle with similar issues, how they address them sometimes can help promote alternative solutions, identify better solutions, and also build a level of comfort that people are doing the right thing. So doing that combination of country-specific and regional office hours, we felt was a really, really viable and valuable approach. The other thing, and I sort of hinted on that a little bit, is in these crises, when there's a lot, either no information or then too much information, the food industry needs research to explain how to, like showed early on in my presentation, flow charts. If this happens, do this. If then this happens, do this, etc. So that really helps them very quickly understand what to do versus just high level, information that often would come from government agencies that would not provide the same specificity. Companies then would become very quickly comfortable changing that to their unique needs, but at least you gave them a good starting point. So one lesson also was give them the resources that explain the how to, but then also allow them to modify it and provide them with electronic versions that can modify to their own needs. Lesson 5, it's really important to develop the best way to connect with your target audience and build that community that drives the office hours. Obviously, considering cultural differences is important, language is important, but we had some surprises that, in some countries, they really wanted office hours on Saturdays because that was the most likely one for people to connect. And some people, I think it was Nepal, where there's long commutes because of a lot of people stuck in traffic. It's like, yeah, the one time people are going to listen to this is when they drive home. They have nothing to do. They're sitting in the car, might as well do this. That's how you're going to get audience. So really understanding that was important. Communication platforms, in some countries, we had to provide basic training on Zoom. We had to be very flexible to move from Zoom to Google Meet to WhatsApp, figure out whatever was needed to effectively communicate with the audiences in their country to get that information to them. So with this, we feel that we've not just learned lessons, but also develop a good system, again, that's sort of cornered in the virtual office hours with a rapidly adapting web page that provides frequently asked questions, video training, fact sheets, flow charts, other information that can be adopted to a number of other crises as this conveying information to maintain a sustainable and stable food system becomes essential, whether that's wars, natural disasters, and pandemics. So we're looking forward to working with USAID and others to really take these lessons in the system and adopt it and apply it as it is needed throughout the world to address other crises. And that's what I had, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martin. I think some really big takeaways. First of all, the fact that you were able to move the system to regional, an excellent demonstration of scaling and really being able to cross-pollinate the questions and solutions to COVID. Really a model that, at least as I heard it and built in my mind, that you demonstrate what you were doing is in working with stakeholders is you identify the problem. There's a period of education, but what people really need too is solutions, or the how. And following that model is how we help people truly make behavior change. And really meeting people where they are. I think you provided some excellent examples of, it's not a one size fits all, and that you have to meet people where they're available in order to get broader dissemination of science-based information. It's my pleasure to welcome all of the panelists back to the stage so that they might answer a few questions. We've certainly had some come in from the audience, and we greatly appreciate that. If I might, I'd like to ask Carol a question to begin. And my question to you, Carol, is, are there countries, regions, or value chains where you think this task force model could be particularly useful in addressing food safety and nutrition challenges?
And we've thought about this. One way in which we think this model could be useful in mitigating impacts of improved food safety systems is on food loss and waste in our target countries. We know that over 30% of food across the globe is wasted, according to 10% of the global, contributing to 10% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So reducing waste is an incredible opportunity to increase availability and affordability of nutritious foods while reducing our climate impacts. The task force model could provide resources on how to reduce contamination and how to avoid unnecessary food waste due to food safety misconceptions, or how to utilize high risk or seemingly spoiled foods, either in animal feed or as fertilizer. So we think leveraging this task force model to reduce food loss and waste can help strengthen food safety systems and help mitigate the impact of food systems on climate change while making nutritious foods more available and affordable.
Yeah,
so that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. I appreciate that, and even in your opening remarks, how you've elevated food safety as a part of this discussion. I would certainly champion the same, that food safety is very much a part of the discussion around waste and loss. Well, spoilage organisms don't necessarily cause disease. We know that as foods begin to spoil or waste, we also can see elevated levels of pathogens. So looking at that interface is certainly something we would be quite excited about trying to support. There's many ways to address the food security issues, and prevention in loss and waste is certainly at the top of my list. I have a question for Dr. Abong. You mentioned that networking was one of the outcomes of the project and that you continue to receive questions. Based on the questions, are there additional topics where you feel this approach would have a positive impact?
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me clearly.
We can. Yes, we can.
Yeah, one of the key question that we still have to struggle with in the Kenyan context is how do we use this model to especially encourage or enhance food safety in our informal sector, especially the ones dealing with fruits and vegetables, which are usually vended in the local markets, usually very crowded. And at the same time, whatever you get in of course, displayed for sale, you of course, we worry about microbial safety. But over the years, we have seen quite a lot of chemical safety becoming a real issue. You are dealing with issues of heavy metals. You are dealing with pesticide residues in fruits and vegetables. And that is a conversation we have continued to see in the local dailies. But I think this model could be one of the ways to help us out. And it is one of the things that we keep grappling with when we are discussing with colleagues on how to solve that problem. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Abong, I think that makes perfect sense. When we look at the amount of food that populations generally consume or source from informal or traditional settings at point of sale, we're really working in a preventive space. We're trying to prevent foodborne pathogens from finding their way onto fruits and vegetables. We're trying to prevent chemical hazards, pesticides, heavy metals of finding their way into fruits and vegetables. And I would agree with you. I think these developing local expertise that can work directly at the front lines of point of sale in traditional markets is certainly a need as far as trying to prevent food safety challenges, but also work with those primary producers or the people growing the foods. As we know, in most cases with food safety, prevention is absolutely key. So thank you. Thank you for your comments there. If I might ask Dr. Kroon a question, how could the task force model be used to address natural disasters in Nepal?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the questions. Yeah, this task force model of virtual office hours shall be used for any possible disaster events in Nepal. For example, earthquake disaster, which Nepal is highly prone to. And we had a bitter experience of earthquake in the last great earthquake in 2015. So preparedness for disaster is yet not established in Nepal, not institutionalized. So task force model like virtual office hour would connect all key stakeholders in coordinated manner, such as concerned authority, government, and private supplies, experts, civil society, international humanitarian aid agencies. And virtual office hour is a very good platform to share the international experience that shall be very useful. Virtual office hour is excellent means to get experts' opinion. For example, in case of earthquake, we can get an opinion from a scientist from USGS that will be very useful. And youth at local level shall be mobilized for communications on the emergency supply or demand of humanitarian aid during the disaster. This model would be very, very useful. Think tank like my organization, NDRI, would be able to facilitate all these supports and coordinate and cooperations and collaborations. So this would be a very useful for the future disaster management in Nepal. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Gruen. That's a really interesting example of bringing together and developing the technical expertise for science-based and data-driven communication, which, of course, in times that are that fragile, are where time is of the essence, it's super critical. If I might ask Dr. Wiedemann a question, can you expand on your vision of how this model might be applied to other problems and share some food safety considerations that arise during crises?
Thanks, Haley. I want to take the first part, expand the vision for this. And I want to build on what, Carol, George, and Jaya said. I think that there are two very obvious routes, I would say, that were mentioned. One of them is applied to existing tough, insidious, wicked problems. And that two were mentioned. And I think those are the two right ones, is food waste and food safety, the intersection. How do we move forward? Reduce food waste, reduce greenhouse gas emission, but at the same time assure food safety. And the second one is food safety in small informal markets. I think it's a problem throughout many parts of the world. In both of them, I think would benefit from an approach like that is more interactive, informative, doesn't pretend there's one right answer, but really uses the conversational style, the exchange of information style, talking about pros and cons of different approaches to move forward. And I think it would also be exciting because it moves it away a little bit from, the one expert or a few experts, which is really not how I see these office hours, to a community of experts, and really realizing that we all need to work together and communicate and hear from the real stakeholders to move forward. So that's one area I would be very, very excited. I think there's tremendous possibility for impact to leveraging what we built here, what we learned here in these two areas. The second one then, of course, is, emergency, whether it's natural disasters, which, looks like we're going to see more of them, and we already are. We look at drought in many regions, or we talk about, supply chain disruptions. I think if someone comes up, say, hey, this supply chain disruption have gotten to a point where it impacts food safety. We need some new ideas. We need better communication. We can rapidly deploy this approach. Whether we start with some of our trusted in-country collaborators you've heard from today, whether we start this as a regional office hours. We've done enough of those now that we have a variety of different options of how to get started and then move on from that. So those are some of the ideas I have on this. The other question in terms of some food safety considerations, I think I'm just going to pick one that is going to be very important. I think whenever something new comes up, whenever a surprise comes up, people refocus resources. Sometimes that refocusing of resources might not, at the end of the day, really have a positive impact on the bigger picture outcome. In this case, very simple, food safety. So COVID-19, we refocus cleaning and sanitation to prevent food safety issues, to do cleaning and sanitation of the outside of packages to prevent COVID transmission, which doesn't really occur through the outside of packages. So to try to find that balance of being responsive to the right level, but not go in the wrong direction, and therefore jeopardize food safety by taking away people resources, infrastructure resources, equipment resources from where they are needed and where they are right now for a good reason. I think has been a key lesson for me, and I think for a lot of other people during the pandemic and brought to us through these office hours, really.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. I think that's a great summary of, in different types of crises, we try not to lose sight of food safety, that it not be lost in the mix, but really that we think about what is meaningful in these particular crises and let them be data and science driven. We appreciate our entire panel for joining us today to share their experiences over the past year working to support food security through food safety at the interface of the COVID-19 pandemic. We really appreciate you joining us today and look forward to you joining us in future webinars. Take care.